You see investors clearly reacting to this, so certainly some nervousness out there surrounding not just what we saw unfold with the Malaysia Airlines flight, but now Israel beginning this ground invasion into Gaza. What does that mean for the region and concerns that we have back here at home?
Well, I mean, it's hard to imagine a more combustive ingredients than what just happened in the Ukraine combined with the Israeli invasion today, and then off the backdrop of what's going on in Iraq with ISIS. But if you step back and look at what just happened with the surface-to-air missile incident, potentially, one of the important implications here is that it's not known yet, and we need to be cautious about whether, if in fact that happened. But I can tell you from my time in the CIA, where we armed the Mujahideen with Stinger missiles to fight the Russians, and we were very concerned about what happens if those missiles got into the wrong hands and were used against commercial aircraft. When I was at Homeland Security, we were again worried about that post 9/11, and most recently in Libya, when Gaddafi fell, we were very concerned about getting our hands on the surface-to-air missiles they had.
So is your fear here that the Russians actually provided the separatists with this weaponry?
It's possible. We've done the same thing against the Russians in other contexts, i.e. Afghanistan. And so, again, I have no conclusive evidence of that, and we need to be very cautious on that front. But the point is, at a time of heightened tensions around the world, it's a scenario that we were always fearing, is that these surface-to-air missiles would be used against civilian aircraft. And unfortunately, it's one of those scenarios.
Deliberately? I mean, I know you worry about everything, but do you worry in this particular case that this may have been a deliberate move?
Well, I think in this case, that's what's unfortunate. Once you release the genie out of the bottle, you can't control it. And I think in the case of the Russians, I do not believe that it makes sense for them. It's not in their self-interest, nor is it in the rebels' interest to have shot down a civilian aircraft. So the reality is they probably did not intend to hit a civilian aircraft. They thought they were targeting a military asset. But the key point is, again, these weapons are extremely dangerous, and once you let the genie out of the bottle, you can't control it anymore. So that's something we'll have to continue to watch, and I can guarantee you there'll be issues raised in the U.S. Congress and elsewhere about whether we should consider other countermeasures put on commercial aircraft to address this threat vector.
Let me ask you about Israel and Gaza. We are getting reports, and I should clarify, reports saying that the ground invasion may have started. Over the last couple of days, there's been a thinking that this is pretty much inevitable, that there's really not an easy, peaceful resolution in front of us right now to the situation that's unfolding there. How do you see this escalating as we do seem to be getting word that Israel may have begun this ground invasion?
Well, I think 2 points. One is, if you look at the attempt to have a peaceful settlement, obviously when Egypt and Israel thought they were entering into a ceasefire agreement, they didn't have all parties on board. So what's going to have to happen now is enough pain and threshold has to be reached to get the parties back to the table. The Hamas and the Palestinians and others have on their side, the pain threshold is their missiles. So going back to the missile theme of the day, the problem they have is that the Israeli counter-missile defense system, the Iron Dome, is so effective that it will be very difficult for Hamas to be able to counter the Israelis with any kind of pressure until Israel finishes its operation. So, again, missiles are one of the themes of the day, and I think the more we can talk about how those are being used both in the Ukraine context as well as here, it's very relevant.
Yeah, most definitely. Just to segue back to the markets as we watch the Dow now off 131 points, S&P down 1%, 21 points, Jason. How much do you think is in fact attributable to the conflict that we're seeing unfold today?
Well, I think it's part of a broader tableau, I think, as Chad mentioned, because you've had a number of things that have happened, and I would say even domestically, too, that would suggest that perhaps there's a situation of vacuum of power around the world. So here in the United States, you also have the situation on our southern border. You also have corporate tax inversions, which suggests that there's not the power at the federal government that perhaps there should be. And then you have what might seem to be a lack of American power, projection of American power abroad, which you're seeing in Iraq and you're seeing perhaps in the Ukraine and in Gaza.
You know, and those are sort of some political issues here. But when you look at the concerns that seem to be reflected right now in the market, and the market sort of being an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. It's not necessarily reflecting stability, given what we just saw today unfold there in eastern Ukraine, and now it looks like in Gaza.
Well, your point earlier about the VIX being, what is it now?
Up
almost
32% today. I mean, the highest level we've seen since January.
So to Jason's point, I think that that not so much necessarily the political issue, but if you look at it from a rational economic point of view, the instability there is going to have a meaningful impact on a variety of fronts. I mean, if we just think about on the oil parameter alone at the gas pump, we're already seeing a very substantial increase, and that was starting just with Iraq and now spilling over. The tensions in Israel are only going to add fuel to that fire.
And again, it does seem we're looking at the VIX now just over 14, up 32%. The S&P now sitting at lows of the session. When you look at what is happening right now, and let's just look at Israel and Gaza, is there some kind of resolution that we can have a role in? What should the U.S. be doing, or is this now still their issue, their problem? Can we affect this in a positive way, Chad?
There's definitely, the U.S. has levers of influence, no question about it, but ultimately the decision to ceasefire will be obviously the decision.
And I do want to confirm, sorry to interrupt, but
right.
Bloomberg News has learned from the Israeli Prime Minister's office that, in fact, the ground operation in Gaza has started. So again, we had been getting reports of some heavy artillery fire being heard. We are confirming through the Israeli Prime Minister's office that the ground operation in Gaza has started. But please resume, Chad.
Yeah, so I think, Trish, on that front, the operation, likely will be done at Israel's discretion and ended at Israel's discretion. But going back to your question about does the U.S. have an opportunity to influence, there's no question that the number one foreign aid provider to Israel is the United States. They will do what they have to do to defend themselves. But at some point, given the relative asymmetric strength of Israel to those in Gaza, and we talked about before the Iron Dome providing Israel with relative indiscretion to move offensively, ultimately, we will be able to ask Israel to show some restraint and bring the parties back to the table. But as Jason said earlier, I think the key question is how much investment is the United States willing to make? And arguably right now, that's one of the regions where we can have and do have significant leverage.
What is the risk for Israel going in with a ground invasion?
The bottom line, militarily, there's obviously some minimal risk of life, but if you look at, again, the asymmetric superiority of the Israeli military, it's relatively low risk for them. The bigger issue is could this spark, for example, a broader reaction from the Arab community that surrounds Israel? This could absolutely be used as a rally cry in Syria, in Iraq, to take arms up against Israel in a variety of ways. So stay tuned. The spillover effect is likely to be meaningful.